I wonder what joy means to you. If I say the word joy, what immediately comes to mind? Anyone fancy sharing?
It's my middle
What's
name.
joy for you?
It's my middle name.
It's your middle name. That is joy. It's a nice name. When you experience joy, what does it feel like? What are you doing? Who are you with?
Happiness.
Happiness. Yeah. It's happiness. Sorry. When your heart gets moved, you can feel it. It's that deep kind of feeling, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. What gives you joy? Laughter. Whiskey. Yeah, that's all right. All things in moderation, John. That's all right. Whiskey. A good whiskey. Yeah, has to be a good one, not a cheap one. Anyone else? What gives you joy? Your grandchildren. Yeah. Children. Most of the time my children give me joy. Not always, but most of the time they do. Joy. It's kind of a funny word, isn't it? A very short word, and yet it has a kind of multitude of meanings. And today is Joy Sunday, Gaudete, Rejoicing Sunday. And yet we have the oddest kind of reading this morning, because I don't know if you heard of John the Baptist. We said we were talking about the John the Baptist, but where is John the Baptist at the start of our Gospel reading this morning? Anyone pick that up? John the Baptist is in prison at this point. We have when John heard from prison. So we start Rejoicing Sunday. We start Joy Sunday, not in celebration, not in brightness, but actually in John, with John in prison, with the darkness and the dampness. And prisons aren't nice places now, but they certainly weren't nice places back then. We have John imprisoned and waiting to see what's going to happen next. I'm actually quite afraid of what's going to happen next, because his future is very uncertain. I have to say it doesn't end well for John the Baptist, unfortunately. So what does that tell us about the kind of joy that we are thinking about on this Advent Sunday? So John is hearing reports about the deeds of the Messiah. So John is sitting there, and then he's hearing about all of the things that Jesus has got up to. But what does John do? John isn't rejoicing in prison. He's not going, all of these prophecies have finally come true. Isn't this amazing? Jesus is doing all of these things. Don't forget, he knows Jesus. Jesus is family. Instead, John is like, what on earth is going on? I don't understand. And so he sends a message out to Jesus, and the question that he asks Jesus isn't, again, a kind of joyful one. It isn't messages of prayers and support. It's like, who are you? Are you the one to come, or actually are we waiting for someone else? Are we going to wait for another? Don't forget, John has staked his entire life on this. He has staked his entire life on the Messiah, on how God was going to act in the world, and now he cannot make sense of how God is acting. John, if you think about John the Baptist last week, if you had any of the readings from last week, it was a Messiah who would break in with judgment and with fire, a God who was going to set things right in the way. He was going to make the paths straight in the wilderness. He was going to flatten the mountains and get rid of all of those obstacles. But instead, he is hearing of Jesus sharing meals with the wrong people. He is hearing about mercy and grace, about all of these outsiders, and he's hearing about healings. Absolutely nothing that looks like rescue. Absolutely nothing that looks like what John has been proclaiming, and what he's in prison for proclaiming. And so John asks the question that's going on behind that kind of waiting. Is God doing what God has promised, or have I misunderstood the promise itself. And as is Jesus' wont, he never answers directly. He always answers with another question, or he tells a story, and he gives a description of what's going on, and he says to the messengers, he sends them back to John, and he says, go and tell John what you hear and see. And then Jesus lists a whole thing of actions. He doesn't give ideas, he doesn't preach theology, he doesn't preach doctrines. He talks about bodies being strengthened, lives being returned, dignity being given back to the poor. He talks about a catalogue of joy. Not a particular kind of joy, not joy as excitement, not joy as triumph, not even joy as happiness as we sometimes experience it, but joy as a really deep rightness of things being back in order and things being as they should be. So Jesus is quoting the Old Testament, he's quoting Isaiah, but he's also redefining the expectations about what his ministry is going to look like. And the joy of God's kingdom doesn't look like how John thought it was going to look like. It doesn't begin with a rescue. It doesn't begin with a military operation. It begins where life has been finished. And then Jesus adds at the end, he says, blessed is anyone who doesn't stumble on account of me. And I think that's a really good message for us in this Advent season. Blessed are those who do not stumble on account of me. Because this kind of joy is really hard. This kind of joy doesn't come naturally to us. This kind of joy is quieter, and it asks us to be more patient. This kind of joy sometimes sneaks up on us. It is that deep movement in our heart when we just know that things are as they should be, even when everything else around us isn't as it should be. And there's a famous story from World War I, I'm sure you've heard it before, on that Christmas Eve, that one Christmas Eve, when all of a sudden, late at night, on that Christmas Eve, the German soldiers were singing carols in the trenches. You've heard this one before, I'm sure. So the German soldiers start to sing carols, and then the British soldiers and the Allied soldiers on the other side, in the other trenches, they join in with these carols. And for a time, a very brief time, all you can hear, not the sound of guns, not the sound of fighting, just the sound of singing, each in their own language. And it becomes even more than that. They climb out of their trenches, and there is tentative meetings in no man's land. And it doesn't change the situation, it doesn't end the war. They go back to fighting after that, but it is just a brief glimpse of life and things as they should be, and it was a moment of deep joy and solace to those in that situation. And that's the kind of joy that this gospel reading is all about. John isn't freed. Unfortunately, John dies. John is beheaded during the time of Jesus' ministry. The system doesn't collapse. They're not overturned, but Jesus is insisting that in the midst of all of that, joy is already present. And then Jesus turns to the crowd and he speaks about John himself. And he doesn't say that John is mistaken or weak for questioning what is going on. He honours him. He honours him as a prophet who stands on the heart of something new. But then Jesus says something which is really shocking to those people. He says, yet the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. It's not about worth, it's about position. John stands just outside of the joy that he is announcing. John has proclaimed joy in saying that Jesus is going to come. He doesn't really get to experience that for himself. He has been one of the prophets that has brought that joy around for those generations. But we stand inside that joy because we are within that promise that John offered, that Jesus gives to us when he comes to earth and lives as one of us. And We're invited to live within that joy even when it feels incomplete, even when we don't have that complete sense that everything is as it should be. And that is why we don't go nuts this Advent with glorias and with celebrations. That is why joy in this Advent season is much gentler. It is the joy of those who know how the story ends, but we're still living in the chapters where everything is going on around us. It is joy, but it is doubt in the same situation. It is joy held with grief, knowing that one doesn't cancel the other out. It is joy, a little bit like a candle in a dark room. So we don't force joy today. We know that we live within it even if we don't feel it. But we do receive that joy today. And what we do ask is for the grace not to miss it when it comes. Amen.
Amen.